Welcome back to another Trade Odds technical analysis tutorial. This is number 4 in the introduction to support resistance levels. So we're going to do trend lines, basically a part 2 of that, and just give you some additional information, additional ways that you can use trend lines for your trading and in your technical analysis. That being said, let's get to the video. Usual, just a quick disclaimer. All contents for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing is financial advice. All right, so we're going to get right into it. We're going to chart some Bitcoin here. And this is trend lines part 2. So, basically the purpose of this video is to give you another, it's very simple, very elementary way of technical analysis, but it works very well in my opinion. And I'm going to give you some examples of how you can use trend lines to not only find your support and resistances like we learned in video 1, but also to give you an early indication of potential trend change, which is very powerful. So if you're able to spot, potential trend changes early on, then that can definitely help your trading considerably. So again, here's Bitcoin, and I guess I'm going to start off with the most current, well, I don't know if that's the best way to do it. I guess we'll start off with some of the historical moves that have worked out quite nicely, and then I'll show you a current pull that I'm very interested in, a current trend line that I'm very interested in, and then maybe we'll go on some lower time frames and try to help you. Not again, like right now we're on a 4-hour chart. You can use this on a daily time frame. Use this on any time frame. I just like 4-hour charts because again it allows me to be a bit more precise. As far as pulling my trend lines. But again, you can use any time frame that you like. But yeah, we'll probably do a few different time frames, a few different methods of trading. So again, this is going to be more swing trade focused, looking at higher time frames, higher time frame type moves. And then maybe we'll go on to some lower time frames as well and try to identify, some potential trend lines that are of interest that you could use for scalp trading, for example, which I do this quite often. So again, here's Bitcoin USD on the 4-hour time frame. And really, I don't want to make this into a 2-hour video because I don't think it really needs to be that long, but I want to show you just on this price action that you're seeing here. There were quite a few trend lines that actually worked out very well to give you an earlier indication. And this obviously works very well being a form of confluence. So if you have other reasons why you might be watching these particular levels, that can be a very powerful tool again. But let's just go ahead and I like rays, by the way. So you have trend lines that you can draw, which give you, again, like you can if you use a trend line, pick a point and then you kind of drag the trend line wherever you want it to go, and you can use those, nothing wrong with that. But when I draw my trend lines, oftentimes I actually like to use rays. And they're just a little bit easier because you pick basically 2 points of reference and then it just extends the line out for you. I don't know why. I just prefer to do that. So anyway, the first one that I'm going to show is actually this previous April all-time high when we basically had your 65K top, and then had that crazy nasty retracement down into May, multi-month consolidation before another move to all-time high. So a really awesome trend line that was very relevant is if you take the top, you're basically your 65K top here, and then you have this second. So basically this is your lower high, right? So you have your 65K top. So let me zoom in and make sure that, yeah, that's good enough. Basically, again, you have your 65K all-time high, get your pullback, price comes back into this trend line, which is like, this is your second touch of the trend line. And again, you notice that you have pretty good distance time-wise from your first touch. So I do like that as far as, it being valid. And then let me just, whoops, I messed it up. Let me just make sure. And by the way, your magnet tool right here, very helpful to, again, kind of like snap right to, exactly where you want those trend lines. So if you zoom in, this is being like really crazy about it, but again, you can see like this is exactly the highs. So I like that. So anyway, zooming back out, here is your trend line. You have 2 touches. Most people say, you know, I think most traders that use trend lines really prefer 3 touches. I wouldn't disagree. But again, I think a lot of times the third touch, you know, when you're looking for that third touch, and then like you use that to confirm your trend line, and then you start trading off of that. I think that I think like the good trades to be had off of that are typically gone, right? So like to me, the third trade is the trade. Like that's like if you're gonna look for that, that's typically the trade. But in this case, so again, 65K all-time high. Get your pullback, your correction. Basically, that gives you your second point of reference. And then that happens in May. You do not revisit this trend line again until this point in July. So that's how much time was actually spent away from here. Now, why is this relevant to me? There's a couple of things that are interesting. So first of all, obviously, we had a big, massive dump in May. Multi-month long consolidation, very nice range to be trading here. And then we actually come back up. It's not perfect touch, but we come back up to the underside of this trend line, right? You get a rejection here, pull back before actually, again, breaking the trend line to the upside, and then you have a really nice move. The thing that's the most interesting for me here, which again, this is actually a really good example to start with, is that was there confluence for you to see a reaction around this high? The answer should be yes, because your range high, let me get this precise as I can. So this is your range high of your multi-month consolidation here. So interesting enough, right? Price comes back up here in July, tests your multi-month range high, and what's very close by, your downtrend right here. So like your trend line that is from your all-time high. So you have nice resistance confluence here as far as that goes. Pullback, right? So you get a nice pullback off of that. Kind of measure it from here. 12.5% pullback off of that region before what? Well, not only did you break your trend line to the upside, which indicates that again, there's a potential trend change, meaning you had this pretty severe downtrend, consolidation, and then now you're not only are you breaking the range high, which is showing you that you're, again, like you're bullish, you're breaking range high, but you're also breaking this downtrend. So you have, you know, like this is telling you two different things. So again, both very bullish. And then what happens from there? You tell me. So basically we broke this downtrend, which was also range high confluence. Well, look at this wick again, right down your range high. Anyway, that leads you to all-time highs. Just out of this simple trend line here, that kind of shows you that not only is this downtrend / range consolidation, this is your first sign that says, hey, this is probably over. And that we're ready to at least get, at least a correction to the upside, or like at least a bit more of, a push to the upside. Then maybe this rolls over hard. But at the end of the day, you got your all-time high push. But again, just showing you that one line on its own, with confluence helps, of course, but one trend line giving you a heads up saying, hey, there's something different. Like there's a change of behavior here. And that this downtrend line that we had, and that's from a very meaningful level, there's two very meaningful pivots. And then a third rejection here broke to the upside. So, hey, that means this trend is probably done. All right. So we're going to delete this. It's not relevant anymore. Let's clear the board here. One very simple, again, another trend line that you could use that ended up being a very nice, simple, again, alert telling you that, again, this corrective. So again, we had to move up from this same region that we were talking about. So this is basically the next part. And it's quite simple. It's just this 53K high here. Nice lower high here. And then this third touch here ended up being where this downtrend technically broke, right? So we have a high, big move down, consolidation, price comes up. Here's your second touch. So this is what, again, starts to give you an idea that says, hey, which by the way, this is very, very well respected of a trend line that you have here. And then price has another big move to the downside, makes new lows. And then what happens? So the third time that price comes up, you actually get a very, you get an initial rejection showing you that this same exact trend line is still relevant, but then you actually consolidate underneath this trend line resistance, break above, and here is your initial phase here telling you that this potential trend, this downtrend is broken, right? And then what happens after that? After you get this breakout, new all-time highs. So again, not that you're going to get a new all-time high every single time that it's broken out, but this is just showing you again, like once your downtrend was broken, then we got a new all-time high. All right. Let's go over another example, which this one is one that is still in play. And this is actually a really big area of interest for myself that I actually shared with the group, but it's this trend line. So starting at, again, your 69K current all-time highs, and then this 52K. So like the thing, by the way, that I think is really helpful is that when you have like something that, and this is a bit more advanced, that I don't feel like anybody's, like, I feel like when people teach trend lines, it's so basic, which it is. It's like one of the first things that I think anybody who's learning technical analysis is going to learn. But what I don't think I've ever heard before, and I think that this is really important and really powerful to kind of give you validity to your trend line, are the pivots, like are the touches, I should say, are the trend line touches important themselves, or are they just random areas? In this instance, this is a perfect case of having a confirmed trend by anybody's standards. So it's not just the two touch, really nice reaction. You have three flawless touches of this trend line. So obviously your first part of your trend line is, that's like where your initial point starts, but then you come into your second and then your third. The thing about this trend line that I think is really powerful, so I can go to a daily time frame just to kind of, I think maybe it'll be a little bit easier to see, but you can see like how strong this downtrend is. But again, you saw even on that 4-hour time frame where you get, again, I like to draw trend lines from lower time frames on smaller time frames because you get the precision, right? Which you can see 3 perfect flawless touches. So this is absolutely valid. Now again, the thing that I like about this pool so much, and that again, like I think it gives it more strength, is the fact, number one, it's such a strong downtrend. It's very likely, at some point you're gonna get, could this continue lower? Could this trend line get another 3 touches on the way down? It's possible. I don't think it's as likely, but I think it's possible. But again, point number 1 up here, which is where you start, is that point relevant? Absolutely. It's literally your current all-time high. It's one of the most important points on this entire chart. Like, it is your current all-time high. That is obviously a very key level. This second touch here is a very important level. For those of you who've been following me, so those of you in the VIP group, we obviously talk about this trade in particular quite a bit. What is this? Well, this is your range high swing failure pattern, right? So this is like your final push up into, your range high swing failure pattern that took you again to new lows, obviously. But this in itself is a very key pivot. There was a very strong reaction. There was a very technical trade, like a very technical point on this chart that obviously led to not only a break of this 30-day range to the downside, but we're trading significantly lower than when we were at this point. But this point number 2 here, very important. Now you go down to point number 3. So this is like the confirmation, right? So if you're the type of trader who, prefers to wait for 3 touches and then, it's a confirmed trend line, that's totally fine. I don't have any, disagreement with that. I don't think that you needed to do that in this case, but again, I don't have any disagreement with that. But what's relevant about this third touch? Well, this was your range high in this current range. So you had this is actually a deviation. If you go on low time frames, this ended up being a deviation. Price gets acceptance back into the general range. This was kind of your final push up, test your range high before a massive rejection. Well, what did you have here as confluence for that range high rejection at that level as well? This downward trend line. Very powerful level. And you can see the last two times that price has come up into touch this line, it's been very violent moves. So will that continue? Because this is 100% going to come in contact with this trend line at some point. And you can see how steep this trend line is. It's going to touch it at some point and likely break, of course, right? So that going forward, which, you know, again, obviously, like when I'm teaching technical analysis, I'm teaching you how to use these tools. We have to look at historical price action. I can't give you a trend line that hasn't even formed yet, right? Like you need 2 points at least to kind of like start drawing these things. So this is like the best I can do. But in this case, I think this is very relevant to today. And it'll be interesting to see what happens again as we come up and to test this downtrend line yet again at some point. Now, what I will say is I do think that when this trend line breaks, so price starts to trade outside of it, right, or above this trend line, that's probably your first indication. Now, obviously, you could have like a deviation and then price, you know, loses the trend line again and you start to, you know, drop lower or whatever. But, you know, I think that this coming into, you know, having this significant of a pullback, I think Bitcoin's like 50% off of its highs. I do think that when this is breached, that's a good sign that you're likely going to enter at least like a corrective phase, like have a corrective move to the upside. So you probably are going to get pretty good follow through once this trend line breaks. But does that mean you're going to new all-time highs? Absolutely not. Like it doesn't mean that. But I do think again that when this trend line breaks, that you could get a pretty nice follow through. Like you could get a pretty nice follow through move before again maybe this ends up rolling over. So this is, you know, this is probably like the most important trend line. This is the most important trend line to me as far as Bitcoin goes at the current moment. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, so like those trend lines that I showed you, right? They're more of like swing trade type trend lines. So like using this to kind of give you a base, right? So like, again, once this does start to break, just like this one did, so kind of going back here. So just like once this started to break to the upside, you can see how violent it got, right? It doesn't mean that it happens like that every time, but obviously this corrective move lower, that was the end of that. And then ended up pushing and making new highs. I expect the same thing here. Again, not necessarily new all-time highs, but I do think that once we break this, that you can get a larger move. So now that we kind of had like those, you know, higher time frame stuff, let's go look at some lower time frame, see if we can see anything interesting. And for these, again, 5 minute is good. You know, it really depends like what I'm trading. I think 5 minute, 3 minute even sometimes. I'm rarely trading on the 1 minute. I think that's kind of like crack trader, the crack time frame trader. You know what I mean? 1 minute is pretty like, you know, obviously, you know, if you're successful trading that, great. But I think like for me, typically, I think 3 minute is kind of like the lowest that I like to go. And I'll tell you, because obviously I've been trading this today, that there have been some really, really nice trend lines just on the 3 minute that I think you should even be aware of. So first of all, there was this one, which I thought this was a really nice example, is off of this, and I call this a major low because it's a major low on like a lower time frame, right? Is this a major low like if you're on a daily chart? No, probably not. But this is, you know, again, looking if you're scalping and you're looking for entries, this in itself, this trend line was a really good trend line. So you're sitting here and be like, well, what happened here? To me, and again, like if you're looking at this, you have your first point, which is obviously this swing low here. And then you do have this, which this, again, this to me is classed as a deviation. It's okay to see these. I don't, if there's like more than one, I don't really like that. But the fact that as price lost, which this technically wasn't the trend line at this time, right? But price broke below and then quickly reclaimed it. And then look how many touches you had going forward. So again, this original thought behind this being a trend line really started to be confirmed the further up this trend actually went. So here again, bit of a deviation. Price reclaims the trend, and then this trend in general, I guess I should just circle it so you can see it a little bit easier. Like this uptrend is intact, right? Even with this little deviation that you see here, overall, this uptrend is intact and respecting this trend line that you see here very, very nicely. So what happens, right? Like how can you use a trend line if you see it being this well respected? Well, what happens when you actually get the break? So here we make a high, come back down, and again, find another, find your support here. You can see that we're chopping around, and then ultimately we start to break it, right? So this is a clear break, clear acceptance below this trend line, and what happens? Well, you get a pretty significant move down. So if you were long anywhere on this uptrend here, once you start to see that this trend is breaking, you can either think one of two things is more than likely to happen. Either you're going to have a correction, right, or a trend reversal in this case, or like you can at least expect a range to start forming. Then maybe it ultimately does continue in the direction that this trend was, but likely at a different rate. So this is a very important distinction to make when it comes to trend lines. And this is at least for how I use them. Trend lines obviously show you areas of support or areas of resistance, depending on, if they're above or below price, right? The previous example where I started at, our current basically 70K all-time high down to the low, like that's a bearish trend, right? That's a bearish trend line, meaning that like that is the lid for price. Price hasn't been able to get above that so far. This is a support trend line, right? With, again, you had a deviation here, but again, it goes back on to respect it very nicely before starting to break it. So, again, like once this starts to break though, range bound, very likely, and then maybe continuation higher or a corrective phase. Meaning that like if you're long from anywhere down here, and part of the basis was that you recognizing that, like, well, it looks like we're in an uptrend, so I want to take a long position. Once you see that this trend starts to break, that's your exit. So this, again, if you're using this, like this would be your exit point. So this is pretty interesting. There's actually a couple that I see. I'm gonna actually get rid of this. So think about, so here's your high, and then this is your failure point, right? So you come below this trend line and then start to make this downtrend. So for me, the first point is going to be here, basically where you tried to bounce, okay? So this, put this at the high. So again, right, broke your trend line, came down, made a low, and then this is where you start to reject. Can't get back above here. And you make new lows, and you start working your way down. So what do you see here? Well, I'm going to delete this just so you don't, again, this trend line is done and over with. Obviously the trend changed. So delete that. Now you have this trend line starting to form here. And how's that? Again, this is the beginning, and I explained why that I would start my trend line here. Price backs off, comes back up for your second touch, and now this is the trend line to watch, in my opinion. I don't want you to wait for 3 touches. This, to me, already something that I'm interested in looking for potential trade off of. And then price makes new lows. You get a pretty strong, decisive move off of this touch. Come back up for your third touch. Check that out. Confirms. So again, for people who wait for 3 touches, and you can kind of see what happens. Why, like by the time you wait for the third touch, and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to take a trade off of it. Well, look at your fourth touch. You barely got any kind of a pullback before it just ripped, completely against you. So that's kind of my argument. And again, if you go back to video 1, like what do I teach you in video 1? The more touches that a trend line has, the weaker theoretically it becomes. Now, whether it be touch 5, touch 6, touch 7, you could have many touches of a particular trend line or a particular support or resistance, like horizontals, trend lines, doesn't matter. The point is, if you wait too long and then decide, okay, now it's confirmed, and then you go to take the trade, the odds of that actually holding up are are statistically less than if you had taken a trade earlier on. So increased risk, yeah, sure. Like you probably do have an increased risk trading, off of a trend line earlier than, maybe like waiting for perfect confirmation. But the reward for doing so oftentimes is much more than waiting for, again, okay, third touch is here, you got the rejection, now I'm going to trade it. Then you come up for your fourth touch, yay, rejection. And then if you're not fast enough, like you probably didn't meet your take profit here, then it just rips up completely against you. So that's kind of, again, my thought process behind why I don't necessarily like to wait for the third touch and then say it's confirmed. But anyway, the point is 4 beautiful touches. And what happens? Price rips up here. And again, if you are short from anywhere here, which hopefully you're not like shorting down here for any reason, but again, like if you're shorting using this trend line, then this is telling you that, again, this particular downtrend is over. And that, again, like either you're going to potentially form a range or you're going to, have a corrective phase. So again, downtrend, in this case, we actually like had a really big pump off of this level. So now that, can you see anywhere else that might be worthy of a trend line here? And again, keep in mind, these are 3-minute time frames. These are like scalping, okay? But just to show you that this type of analysis, now it's like, this isn't like my number one analysis that I go to. This is a very simple, very easy to understand, I think, method of technical analysis. But I think that like understanding support and resistance and why like trend lines work and how they work, I think that's very important to becoming like a really good trader. But anyway, so you have this. What do you notice about here? Well, to me, there's like a very strong, like very nice uptrend. So you have like on 3-minute time frame, you have like a lower time frame trend change here, right? Basically comes in, forms your low, and then you start building what ends up being like bullish market structure on really low time frames. Okay, so you've clearly broken this trend line. One thing that I will say is that when you have a very well respected trend line, it's often wise to keep it on your chart, because even if price revisits it later on at some point, you'd be surprised how often trend lines like this end up flipping into like support. It could be much different prices than you're trading the last time that you were actually trading this. But the point is, a lot of times, especially when you have really higher time frame trend lines, you'll find that if price does interact with them later in the future, that they end up being pretty decent support resistance levels. That goes for channels, that goes for any kind of trend line type technical analysis. So I would, if you have something that has been very well respected, maybe it might be a good idea to keep that on. But so anyway, we broke, clear, clean move to the upside, starting a new trend. Obviously, this is done. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. But now we have this trend line, which I should use my magnet tool just so it gets a bit more precise. So there you go. So again, zooming in, right? You have the beginning, which is the swing low. You have a nice touch here. Price moves up, comes in for support. Price, again, respected. Price moves up, comes back in. You have technically 4 nice touches here in a very short amount of time. Keep in mind, 3-minute time frame. And then after this last support touch, very, nice impulsive move up. And then you're actually starting, like you started this new kind of trend line up here. So this is what I would say, again, keep in mind it's a 3-minute time frame. But sometimes in this instance, you have like, I would treat this like, and this isn't like a technical term for it, but I'll just say you kind of had major trend lines and minor trend lines. And what I mean by that is that to me in this, in this case, this is a major trend line, meaning that like this hasn't been retested yet. It has 4 touches, very good support. And like you're waiting for, the inevitable touch of this trend line at some point in the future to base, potential trade off of. And then you have this. So this is what I would say like a minor trend line, meaning that like you have a potential trend here, that you, again, like this is like rate of change, right? So basically this has a pretty steep rate of change. And then you have this impulsive move up, which is like obviously taking you pretty far away from where this current trend line is. But then you have this second kind of trend that's forming here, which you've broken currently. So interesting enough that this trend has broken for the time being. What can I like? What do I think is a bit more probable? Well, either a sideways move or a correction. So this is kind of one of the points where I would say you have, again, kind of like this trend line, which is kind of like your, you know, what I would say again is probably like the more important trend line that I would be watching overall. But you have this kind of minor trend line here where, again, you're finding support here locally after this really big impulsive move to the upside. But currently, like you're starting to flatten out. And if you can see that you're kind of starting to form a bit of a range here. So this impulsive move here, so again, like you have your impulsive move up and then you have this grind higher. What this is kind of signaling to you that this trend line currently is broken, that again, this could be the end of this move and you could potentially be in for a bit more of a correction. And then obviously, so you have this trend that is currently trading outside of. So am I looking for this to continue higher? Not at the moment. Now, if this maybe reclaims this, does something like this, trades up and then starts to get back above here, then yeah, like this trend line would still be valid. And then you would kind of treat this as a little bit of a deviation, right? However, what I think is a bit more likely is that, yes, we kind of go sideways here. And then you're going to run into this trend line. And again, do you have a touch here that maybe starts to the reversal and you continue on this trend line? Or does it break this trend line too? And then again, you'd be looking for probably a deeper retracement at that point. So hopefully that wasn't super confusing. But I just wanted to show you again, like how you can use trend lines in your analysis, not only on higher time frames, which for those of you swing traders, I really would say it's probably a good idea to stick to those, like the first half of the video where we went over like major trend lines. And, like, again, I think they're very powerful. They're very easy to find. They're very easy to draw. And then like you have this kind of scalping trend lines that you can identify that, again, I think are very powerful. I think they're very useful. But like, I'm just going to be honest with you, they're not like my main way of trading by any means. And I do see them from time to time. And the ones that are very obvious, I definitely am going to recognize and keep an eye on. But this is definitely, this is part of support and resistance. Trend lines are kind of one of those topics that I think like some traders love and some traders hate, because trend lines are kind of arbitrary, right? Like you can make adjustments to your trend lines to kind of fit your bias, which I will tell you that I do that. Like I think it's, important to, get your trend lines as accurate as you think they are. I think that's where like, I do think that that's correct. Some people might disagree with me, but again, like having that kind of like, like having that, mentality of like potentially like adjusting your trend lines and whatnot, which is why like I'm more of a horizontal. I really love horizontal support and resistances. I trade off of those like all the time. But again, like I think I've showed here how powerful trend lines in general can be and why I think they're worth like, no matter what some traders might say, I think that they're definitely worth understanding at least. And maybe you don't need to use this every day in your analysis. Maybe it does. Maybe it isn't like your, part of your top three, like top three tools that you use in your technical analysis, and that's okay. But I do think that it's important though to understand the concept of them. So hopefully this video helped out a little bit, kind of give you again like trend lines part 2, and kind of really focusing more on the trend change aspect and like when trend lines break, kind of like how you can use that information to make better trading decisions, hopefully. And again, like the key thing, 2 important points I want to make before I go. Number 1, confluence. I think that's immensely important. I really want to see trend line breaks and having other, whether it's divergences, bearish, bullish divergences, maybe you're coming into a key level. I want to see like something else that's really saying you know, to kind of minimize the fake outs, right? I want it to line up technically with another, you know, other forms of confluence that are saying, hey, like this is a really interesting pivot, or like, yeah, like I showed you earlier when we were breaking the that multi-month range high, and having that kind of confluence for that. Once that broke to the upside, it was clear and definitive at that point that that trend is not only broken, but you're probably going to see really good follow through. And then also that major Bitcoin downtrend from our current 69,000 all-time high down to our lows, that major trend line I do think is going to be very important. These trend lines here that you see, keep in mind, these are on 3-minute time frames. Okay, they still work in my opinion, but again, we're on a 3-minute time frame. These are like not like major price action structure that you're seeing here. Okay, but again, the theory works. Like you still apply the theory the same way no matter what. So I'll leave you with that. I hope that that was enough to help you out with this video. So that being said, trade safe out there. We'll see you on the next one.